Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll get started.
This story will tell about a girl who was incredibly angry about a novel, at the end of which absolutely all the characters died. When she was reading it and was already at the end, she was walking down the street and listening to music on her headphones. The girl was incredibly angry about this story. She didn't understand how such a stupid ending could have been thought up at all. But what disappointed her most was the fact that she paid her own money for this story. And in the end, she only got bad emotions from it. In fact, after listening to the anti-harem novel, the girl named Ju Yumen changed her life. However, this was not specially. She was forcibly tied to a psychological correction system, and as soon as she wanted to listen to another chapter in order to find out what would happen next, she saw a notification that appeared on her screen. It said that the owner had been found, and the phone itself began to connect to something. Eventually, Ju was simply thrown into the world of the novel she was listening to, and in that place, she became the unfortunate protagonist, who, according to the plot, was simply supposed to commit suicide. However, fortunately for her, this system did have a conscience. It transferred Ju to the past, when the main character Luna was only 18 years old. So now the girl had a huge chance to change the ending of the story, and she really hoped that she would succeed, because she didn't want to end up just committing suicide. However, when she got directly into this world, she realized that the system of conscience did not have as much as she would like. As soon as she entered that world, it became incredibly difficult for her to communicate with people, and in particular with men. And Ju immediately turned to the system, asking why this was so. They immediately started answering her. It was said that everything was simple. According to the plot, the hero's cruelty was supposed to grow gradually. However, her appearance radically changed dynamics. Even though time was reverted back to when the heroine was only 18 years old, the heroes remembered the events of the original ending, and because of this, their bitterness levels remained high, so their actions matched their opinions. As soon as Ju heard this, she was a little disappointed, because it meant that the difficulty had increased greatly. At this moment, she sat next to her assistant, and after that, she began to remember all the heroes that were in the story. The first thing she remembered was the guy who was Louis. He relied on his status as a king. He was also the fiancé of Luna, the heroine into whom the girl had moved. As soon as he appeared in front of her, the system said that his bitterness was 75%. The signs were that he was cold and merciless. The reason was unknown. What outraged Luna most was the fact that this man, having barely met her, immediately declared that they should immediately get married. After this, a second hero appeared. His name was Andre, and he was Luna's cousin. His bitterness was slightly higher than Louis'. The signs were anxiety. The cause was also unknown. However, this human was really good brother for Moons. But one day he decided to take away her right to the family inheritance, which greatly shocked the girl and even made her worry. Her brother came to her and handed her the papers. He said that they were documents and also asked that she immediately sign a renunciation of the right to inherit the family title. As soon as Luna saw them, she was very indignant. She could not believe that he could be such a scoundrel, and also that he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The third hero was the fox. He was a cursed vampire and seemed well-mannered and very polite. But in fact, he was a very cruel man, because from the very beginning, as soon as the girl met him, his cruelty was as much as 120%. Luna also had a dog. It started barking as soon as it saw this vampire, thus making it clear that the level of cruelty of one of the main characters was enormous. So Luna decided that it was better to play along with him, because otherwise this man could easily kill them. Of course, the girl had to agree with his assumption because she understood that she certainly did not want to die because she was reborn and would like to, on the contrary, save her life by changing the ending. So the girl extended her hand to him and with a smile on her face said that after thinking carefully, she decided to play along with him in the play because she thought that it could even be funny. Therefore, she calmly accepted his challenge. However, in reality, this man decided to take advantage of the situation and stole her first kiss. Of course, Luna was incredibly indignant because he did it in public when they were performing a scene in the play. She blushed all over, but she couldn't do anything, because then she would ruin the whole performance. But luckily, the last protagonist turned out to be the calmest of them all. He was a small boy, and he was in the form of a dog. When Luna first met him, the boy ran up to her and called her his mistress. As soon as she heard this, she immediately asked in surprise why he started calling her that. But the guy explained that since she had saved him, She was now his mistress. He was even ready to give his life for her, because it was very important to him. As soon as Luna heard this, she was even more surprised, because she hadn't even saved him yet, and he had already decided to acknowledge her as his mistress. She thought this guy was very naive, and she even felt a little sorry for him. Then the system flashed information. This boy's name was Blake, and he was a werewolf. His ferocity was only 10%. The symptoms were absent, as was the cause. As soon as she saw all this, she was very surprised by such a small degree of bitterness, because this was the first hero who turned out to be kind and naive. This was very. It's nice that she even a little eye burst into tears. No matter how she looked, in front of her was just a pure, trusting wolf cub who still knew absolutely nothing about life. Therefore, she considered it quite important to have contact and communication with him. In general, the girl had to try to cope with 4 heroes at once, who could attack and kill her at any moment, and also with difficulty complete the task of detecting bitterness. When she returned home, she turned to the dog, who understood her perfectly and with whom she could communicate. Luna turned to him and said that she absolutely had to reset the cruelty of all 4 heroes for the mission to be considered complete. She knew this, but decided to ask again and asked if she could just pick one for this task. The dog, who was her assistant, immediately said that she needed everyone. It was better for her to use resources on those who were the most difficult to give into in order to increase her chance of success. In another way was no way. But in reality, Luna couldn't have imagined that her sympathy would suddenly increase due to the fact that they would all fall in love with her. Luna thought it was all just awful, because she just wanted to complete the task and not have affairs with all the heroes at the same time. She really hoped that they would stop making fun of her and just let her calmly solve this problem in another way, but this was, unfortunately, impossible, because this process had already been launched. One day, when she was in her estate, Lewis came to her. He began to strangle her with both hands and was very angry. The man asked if she really tried to escape from them. He said that the vampire man had been caught, the wolf had been killed, and so she too would soon die. And Lewis was very angry, and he said that now there was no one to stand up for her, but she still tried to run away. For him, it was unthinkable. Luna tried to push his hands away from her and said that she just wanted to leave. She never had any feelings for either of them, and she never wanted any of this. As soon as the guy heard this, he was very surprised. He did not expect that she did not love them. He thought for a while and then said in a sinister voice that he did not care about it, and he still wanted her to be his. At that moment, Luna began to lose consciousness. Blood poured out of her mouth, and with a smile on her face, she said that since he really wanted it, then in return, he would simply get a corpse. Lewis, of course, was very frightened. He began to ask her what she had done, but the girl did not answer. Then he shouted, turning to the servants, and asked them to call a doctor. This ending was according to the plot. After the girl's death, Lewis buried her as a queen. He not dropped even no one tears on ceremonies. Conversely, he became an even more bloodthirsty warrior after that. He eventually died from severe infection after receiving wounds in the war, and that was the reason why Ju was so angry about that ending. In fact, as soon as she was transported, the girl was immediately told where she was, namely in the royal court of the Norman family. Also, before she opened her eyes as Luna, her purpose was explained to her. She was to use the task provided by the system to reduce the percentage of bitterness and rewrite her tragic fate. As soon as Luna opened her eyes for the first time, Lewis appeared in front of her. He took off his clothes and said that since she was already awake, he could begin. The girl, of course, was incredibly surprised to hear this. She did not understand what he meant. However, at that moment, he leaned on her and began to hold her hand so that she would not interfere. Luna was ready to scream because she was so scared that she couldn't even say a word. All this time, she was trying to figure out what he was going to start. And after some time, the system loaded into the girl's memory everything that happened before. Luna now realized that she was engaged to His Majesty, and when they were to marry, she would become a bird in a cage and would no longer be able to hunt demons. Before they finally got married, the man called all the servants and the best doctors to check her condition. When the doctor did this, he said that at first glance everything was fine with the body, so Luna had to enter into a trial marriage with His Majesty, and if she could not conceive a child for him, then she could become his concubine. The girl also knew that for the sake of her family, she could not refuse this marriage. However, if she was seriously injured during the monster hunt, she could postpone this marriage for some time, which would greatly save the situation. In fact, Luna also knew that she had been unconscious for quite a long time, and Lewis was fed up with it all and asked that they get her back in order in 3 days. The man said that she should be cured in that time. The healer immediately replied that they would do everything possible, and they really did manage to do it. However, now that Luna was lying under his naked torso, she was very surprised that he was going to do all sorts of naughty things to her after they barely saved her. She considered him a completely shameless man, especially when he reached for her nightgown and began to pull it down. Then she panicked very strongly. The girl didn't want to lose her virginity so easily, so she knew he had to be stopped. However, at that moment to her it came notification from systems. In the short time she spent with Louis, the system was able to gather some information. The main problem was political interests, and his greatest dislike was blood. So as soon as Luna found out about this, she immediately knew what she had to do. She pulled on the bandages that were covering her wound, which she had received in the fight with the monsters, and blood began to spurt out. The bleeding was quite heavy, so it splashed all over the man's half-naked body. He just watched it in amazement for a while, but then he got really angry. He grabbed her by the neck and started shouting at the girl, asking what she was doing, and also wondering if she was still trying to avoid marrying him in this way. As soon as Luna saw his behavior, she was very surprised, because the system said that he hated blood more than anything in the world. But she did not understand why he had almost no reaction. The man continued to strangle her for some time. However, when he saw that a whole pool of blood had flowed from her wound onto the bed, he suddenly stopped. A memory immediately appeared in his head. How he was little, standing and crying, and blood was pouring out on his hands, and he simply did not know what to do, because this blood did not belong to him. At that moment, he let go of Luna and, gritting his teeth, shouted, telling her to leave immediately. The girl immediately put her nightgown back on properly and started to walk out. Before she walked out, she looked at Lewis indignantly and didn't understand what was wrong with him. She walked along the corridors and kept thinking about what she should do next. She understood that she needed to leave the royal court as soon as possible. She had to do it quickly, because the idiot king could change his mind and then she would definitely be in trouble. Then she suddenly stopped because she realized that she didn't know this castle or the road at all, so she didn't know where to go. She looked around in panic and tried to figure out how to find a way out. However, suddenly a voice was heard behind her which addressed her in surprise. When Luna turned back, she immediately saw her cousin Andre. He came closer to her and asked why she was standing in the corridor and not with His Majesty. Of course, as soon as the system sent her a notification about his level of bitterness, she was very surprised, because it was even higher than the king's. She also got a hint that despite his level of bitterness being high, he was a very anxious person, and therefore had no intention of attacking her. She immediately became interested when she saw that he was very worried, so Luna ran up to her older brother and asked him not to ask her so many questions. With tears in her eyes, the girl said that she was injured and asked if he could take her home, because she simply could not stay there any longer. The guy, of course, looked at her with distrust, but agreed, and that same evening they were already riding in a carriage in order to quickly return Luna back. Andrea sat next to her and, bandaging the wound again, asked, "Is it really possible that in order to avoid a trial marriage, she deliberately opened her wound when it was already getting to the intimate moment?" The girl giggled nervously and said that she was just very scared because she had never had such an experience before, so she was not ready. The man looked rather stern and said that she had certainly managed to avoid it this time, but he wondered what she would do next time, since she would not be able to avoid him forever. He looked her straight in the eye and asked her if she would like him to help her think of a way to break off this engagement. Luna, hearing this, was very surprised. She asked in an anxious voice, "Is this really possible?" Of course, Andrea had a cunning plan. He handed her the papers and said that he could do it on the condition that she renounce her right to inherit the title immediately. Luna understood that she couldn't show too much emotion at that moment. She had to calm down and think carefully. In fact, before she was reincarnated, she knew the original story very well and understood that all these events were radically different from it. In fact, in the original, Luna was deliberately injured at this point. The king was completely indifferent to this and coldly agreed to postpone the wedding. Later, when he fell in love with her, he would begin to try to win her over in every possible way. And Andre, although he became the captain of the royal guard thanks to his outstanding abilities, did not plan to fight for the right to inherit the family title. This was due to the fact that the Damville family prospered due to the pure-blooded monster hunters, and each head chose from the most pure-blooded members of the family. Luna was the only daughter of the current head of the family, and Andre was just an adopted son with no hunting roots. Therefore, when the man offered her this contract, the girl immediately turned to the system and asked what was happening, and also why it had become so difficult to communicate since her reincarnation. When the system explained everything to her, Luna was upset that the difficulty had now increased, and at some points she didn't even know what to do. Adrian, when he saw that she was talking to herself, somehow even avoiding the answer, asked her not to drag it out for so long, but to say directly, does she really want to refuse his offer? Luna was taken by surprise. She sighed heavily, said that she actually had no intention of giving up her right of inheritance, so of course she would not agree to his proposal. She understood that, despite the fact that her relationship lines were already at hellish complexity, she had to keep her career line at any cost and did not want to complicate her life even more. The right of inheritance was the only thing she could rely on, so of course Luna was not going to give it up under any circumstances. Adrian, of course, frowned. He turned away from her and said that she was so stubborn that it was driving him crazy, and also said that in that case, she should figure out how to break off her engagement herself. She immediately looked at his dark side level and noticed that it remained the same, and she was very surprised because she did not agree to his deal, but nothing changed. Then she received a notification from the system. It said that because of anxiety, he suffered from chronic insomnia and constant headaches. The system also said that she could choose one of the following treatments to reduce her bitterness: medication, cognitive therapy, which would require talking, and adjunctive therapy. Luna immediately thought about all this and thought that drug treatment and conversation were impossible to carry out under the current circumstances, so she decided to call for adjuvant therapy. After some time, the system sent her a notification that since she had chosen this therapy, she could start by massaging Andrea's forehead to relieve the headache. The girl was immediately glad that the first task was so easy because she could do the massage immediately and immediately reached out to his head with her hands. But the man, as soon as he saw this, immediately became worried. He moved away from her and, shouting, asked what she was doing. The girl smiled and said that he shouldn't worry because she could see that he had a headache and would like to help him relax a little with a massage. Her brother was still very nervous. He continued to raise his voice, said that he did not need this at all, and asked her to never do it again, especially without his permission. At that moment, their carriage ran over a rock, and there was a strong shaking inside. Luna accidentally lost her footing and fell straight onto the man's chest. For some time, after everything had calmed down, she lay there and even noticed that it was quite pleasant. However, he did not like this at all. He immediately began to throw her aside and told the girl to leave him. Luna apologized to him and said that she didn't mean to, but at that moment she began waving her arm so hard that she accidentally touched the man's lower body. He even screamed in surprise, as did the girl herself. At that moment, she was incredibly ashamed and awkward because of what had happened between them. She quickly moved away from him to the other side and immediately apologized, saying that she really didn't mean to do it. Andrea, turning away from her, told her to shut up already and to just not say anything else. They drove in silence for a while. But at that moment, Andrea looked out the window and noticed something black flashing by. His reaction was very good. He reacted in time and, grabbing his sister by the head, moved her away from the window because at that moment it broke and a black hand flew into the salon. After that, a creature flew into the carriage which also tried to scare the coachman. It succeeded because he immediately realized that it was a vampire. He quickly stopped the horses and, running out, began to shout for help because the creature began to threaten him, and the guy was very timid. The vampire smiled happily at this point. He was about to watch how the purebred monster hunter and the half-breed boy would resist against him and his army. At that very moment, a multitude of bats flew into the carriage. Andrea laid the girl on the floor so that they would not be harmed, because these bats were hunting directly at them. Of course, the man did not expect that the vampire would dare to appear in this place in broad daylight. He was also very excited because he did not bring a weapon with him. He just lay and covered his sisters with hands. He lay like that for a while, then, when their eyes met, he said that he would detain the vampire, and she needed to leave immediately. The boy explained to Luna that they had recently left the royal palace, so the guards were nearby. He wanted her to find them and bring them to help. The girl immediately began to protest. She said that she could help him, but he told her not to say such nonsense, because she didn't even have a weapon, and he didn't understand how she was going to resist these vampires. At that moment, Luna decided to act, because she knew that talking was only making things worse. So she bit her finger so hard that it started bleeding. In fact, she remembered that the original story said that she was the purest girl in the Demwell family's generation. And even without a weapon, at a critical moment, she could enchant her hands with her own blood, enough so that the bloody hand would smear the vampire, and it would burn him and push him away. At that moment, Luna sat still, put her hands together, and silently chanted some spell. When the vampire began to attack her, she used this spell against him. He immediately felt an incredible pain inside himself. He understood that this was the power of a pure-blooded monster hunter, so he was very surprised that she was even stronger than the Overlord told him. However, the purpose of testing their strength had already been achieved, so he knew that he had to retreat with his bats, because he hoped that the Lord would not punish him because of this. When this attack happened and everything was over, Luna was very surprised because she did not expect that everything could work out the first time. But then she realized that a purebred monster hunter is not a joke after all. Luna was only 18 and her uncle hadn't even taught her how to use charms yet, so Andrea was very surprised when she used it, but he assumed that she figured it out somehow. He even thought about how this was an insurmountable gap between him, an adopted son, and the girl who was a pureblood. It made him feel a little sad. However, he still had to fight for the right to inherit. The man was not going to back down from his goal and dream just because she might be much stronger than him. At that moment, Luna suddenly burst into tears and began to scream loudly. She said that her fingers hurt incredibly. They hurt now, and she shook her hand all the time because she almost bit off her finger. She wanted to fight this vampire so much. But Andrea was surprised, because usually she was always very reserved and noble, and today she was more active and emotional. The girl looked at him with a sad look, and turning to her brother, asked him to take her home. She was all wounded and could not stand any more travels or adventures. Andrea didn't object to her after that. He said he would take her, of course. After this, they found escaped the coachman and set off home. At this very moment, a fair-haired boy who came out onto the street began to observe what was happening. He noticed that the future heiress of the Demville family was indeed very strong and agile. He knew that in order to get closer to her, he needed to act more carefully, so he began to mentally think of a new plan on how to start communicating with her. Some time passed since then, and now they finally reached the estate. Andrea came out was the first to file to the girl hand. He said that in order to avoid infection, she should rather wash the blood off her hands and bandage all the wounds, because this could be very dangerous. Luna, getting off the carriage, said that he also had scratches on his face and asked if he wanted to bandage them with her. So was Wood much more reliable, by her opinion. But the guy waved his hand and said that he didn't need to do that, because these were just minor scratches, so he didn't think anything was wrong with it. However, she suddenly grabbed his face and said that it was absolutely wrong to treat him like that. After all, he had such a beautiful face, and these scratches could leave a scar, even if they were not treated in time. The man felt even more awkward and uncomfortable about this conversation, so he removed her hands from his face and said that he really didn't need it. After that, he quickly turned around and began to walk away from Luna, saying that he asked her not to follow him anymore. The girl was left standing alone at that moment. She was very surprised that the guy did not care about himself at all, and thought that he was not even afraid of pain. She stood near the carriage for some time when he suddenly saw a dog running out to meet her. She immediately said that she had gathered new information for her mistress. Since Luna was in this world for the first time, she was very surprised because she did not understand why the dog spoke to her. And the poodle, wagging its tail, told her not to be afraid, because it was a system. It could simply move into the bodies of domestic animals when necessary. He also said that she could call him by the name of this pet, namely Honey. Of course, Luna was uncomfortable with this, but she wondered what the dog wanted to say. Then the dog explained that she had just slightly improved Andre's attitude towards her. The system found out that he loves aroma lavender oils. Honey suggested that perhaps she could use this to help him sleep and reduce his level of anger. As soon as the girl heard this, she was genuinely surprised because she somehow improved his relationship. However, he this even no way not showed. The girl suggested that most likely, despite the struggle for the right to inherit, he was raised as a true gentleman, and even with a high level of bitterness, he still showed sympathy because she protected him. So she decided that he would be the target of her first conquest. She grabbed the dog in her arms and asked where she could get this lavender oil, because she wanted to get started as soon as possible. Honey immediately replied that it could be purchased at the Eastern Market tomorrow evening. Her father would return from his tour of the estates, and he would definitely begin to interrogate her about her escape, so the girl had to hurry. As soon as Luna heard this, she immediately became happy, because Honey was her best assistant, and suggested that they go get lavender oil tomorrow. A whole day passed from that moment, and with the help of this beautiful poodle, the girl managed to sneak into the market unnoticed. When she found herself in the center of events, she was very surprised. Luna didn't expect the place to be so busy, and she also thought that if she had more time, she would have enjoyed walking around and looking at all the goods. At that moment, a young man suddenly approached her from behind. He asked if he could ask her for a favor and also called her a beautiful lady. When she turned around, she saw a blonde guy. He said that his theater Solovi was holding a street performance. They were randomly choosing one spectator to participate, and he would really like her to play the role of his princess. Luna, of course, was very surprised when she heard this. She apologized but said that she had things to do and would not be able to participate because of this. It was at that moment that Honey gave her a warning that this man could kill her, as he was also the main character and had high bitterness. The guy, holding out his hand, asked her with a smile on his face to think again. After all, if he missed the opportunity to perform with such a beautiful lady like her, his heart would be broken. Then Luna thought for a moment and realized that it was a vampire hiding in the capital, one of the original's male characters, Fox. Even though he looked like such a gentleman even now, he was originally an extremely fickle person, and his level of bitterness was incredibly high right now. So, no matter how much she wanted to, she had to play along with him. The girl took his hand and said that she thought again and showed that it could be fun, so she agreed to the proposal. The fox smiled and said that he was very glad that she had changed her mind, and also asked if he could find out her name, because he was sure that it was as beautiful as she was. Luna immediately introduced herself. He continued to look into her eyes and said that he asked her to trust him because he promised that this would be an unforgettable and wonderful experience for her. These words made the girl very wary. However, she understood that she could be in great danger if she did not continue to play along, so she tried to maintain a calm expression on her face. At that very moment, a young man came out on stage. He addressed the people who had already crowded around their stage and welcomed them to the street performance of the Solovi Theater. With his arms outstretched to the sides as if accepting the audience's applause, he said that now their most exciting final scene of this performance would begin. Luna, immediately peeking out from behind the scenes, asked if she needed to go on stage already and, indignantly, said that no one had told her what to do. The fox looked completely calm. He said that she didn't need to worry, she had to play Sleeping Beauty. So what to her absolutely nothing not need to was due. At that very moment, having heard the necessary words from the host, he picked up the girl in his arms. She, immediately indignant, asked what he was doing and also asked him to put her down on the ground. However, he smiled slyly and told her to be quieter, because they were already leaving. He also said that she just needed to close her eyes and enjoy the process. Luna turned red all over, but then, exhaling, she realized that she had no choice anyway, so what to her had to obey. At that moment, a man came on stage. He started playing his part and saying lines. His character did not understand why fate was so unfair to him and why it took his beloved on the night before the wedding. Luna, meanwhile, lay with her eyes closed and said nothing as she had been told. The guy, looking very tragic, said that if he had the opportunity, he would give his life just to save her. Then, sighing heavily, he said that, alas, he had no such opportunity. After that, he looked at the girl and asked that his beloved allow him to kiss her one last time, and then he would follow her to another world. In fact, Luna did not expect that this shameless deceiver could act so well. She also thought that it was not for nothing that he hid in the capital under the guise of a theater owner. But as soon as she heard the kisses, she was indignant because there was no talk of this behind the scenes. Just when Luna was wondering if it was too late to refuse, the man's lips touched hers. She blushed even more, and the girl did not understand why her heart began to beat so fast. She knew perfectly well that this man was incredibly dangerous. In the original, he wasn't even her favorite character. However, from this kiss, her heart simply fluttered for unknown reasons. And so from that moment, a few minutes passed, when all the people had already left, because the performance was over. Luna met a man backstage because she wanted to talk. She was actually still feeling awkward about the whole situation. However, because the man had quite a high level of aggression, she couldn't say anything, so she replied that the experience was quite enjoyable for her, and she was glad that she decided to participate in the performance. She waved goodbye to him and said that she also had other things to do, so it was time for her to go. The fox turned to Miss Luna and asked her not to hurry, because if she wanted to see the play again, she should come to the Nightingale Theater. He would always be very glad to see her there. When the girl left, the man sighed heavily and thought that the purebred monster hunter had done what he wanted after all. The man put in a lot of effort. However, he couldn't even completely charm her, because if he had succeeded, he believed that the girl would definitely not have left. At that moment, a man came up to him from behind. He turned to the Count and said that he had ordered him to attack her in order to test her strength. However, now he wanted to charm her. This surprised the guy very much. The fox said that everything was absolutely right. Even though he hadn't managed to charm her completely, they had still achieved that physical contact, and he was ready to bet that the girl would have come running to him very soon. At this point, Luna turned to Hannah, who was back in the market, and asked if the system had been able to analyze anything, since she had spent quite a lot of time with this man. The dog immediately apologized to its owner and said that his game was too good. And even if she were an outstanding psychologist, it would be difficult for her to understand anything in such a short time. Luna was of course upset by this. However, she said that in that case, she could go and buy lavender oil to at least reduce her brother's bitterness. Honey immediately barked and said that she would overcome the kissed butter very close by, so she need not worry. They would definitely have time to buy it. However, at that moment, a loud noise suddenly began to form around them, because people were being dispersed in different directions, because His Majesty had arrived in the city. The people around immediately began to bow, and Luna stood there and did not understand what was happening at all, and also why he suddenly appeared there. The people greeted His Highness, and the girl immediately bowed, because she understood that she could not let him notice her. She felt in her gut that nothing good would come of it. At that moment, the man on the horse stopped next to the girl and asked Luna what she was doing in that place. Of course, the girl was very upset that he noticed her, but she nervously answered in a trembling voice that she had come to buy lavender oil for her cousin. The girl explained that he had been having insomnia for a long time, and she had heard that it could help him fall asleep, so she decided to check it out. The boy, hearing about this, immediately frowned. But then, jumping off the horse, he touched her face with his hand and asked if she really had time to take care of Andre. He was surprised by the fact that she was not thinking about his affairs at all, and he asked her what she had decided about the trial marriage. He asked her if she would mind conducting the test right there, because she had run away from him so much that he did not know whether he would be able to catch her at all. As soon as Luna heard about this, she was very surprised. She immediately wondered if this was some kind of joke, because there were so many people in this place, and they were all looking at them. She touched his hand with hers to remove it and said that she could not allow herself to try marriage in public like this, so she considered it completely unacceptable. The man, hearing this, immediately frowned. He asked what kind of nonsense she was talking and pulled her closer to him. He threw her over his shoulder and, turning to the chief guard, asked him to plan the nearest room for them. He also wanted everyone to retreat 1 kilometer. Without his permission, no one was to return, including the guards too. The guy bowed and immediately said that he would do everything. And Luna was very anxious at that moment. She could not believe that this man really wanted to take her to the next room and do there the terrible thing she was thinking about. She even thought that he was some kind of beast because he could get excited absolutely anywhere, and this irritated and surprised her even more. When Lewis brought her into the room, she started screaming and saying that he couldn't do that, because it was no different from kidnapping a girl. But he asked her to just shut up, because he was giving her a chance to finally fulfill her duty. He threw her on the bed. The girl at this moment continued to scream and say that she did not want all this. However, to him was all equals. Luna couldn't believe that he was really that serious. She didn't know what to do because, like last time, hiding her wounds wouldn't be very effective. But at that moment, he just took and tied her hands. He told her that she needed to throw all stupid thoughts out of her head, because this time, she would not be able to hurt herself. Reliably took care of about this. Then he began to undress the girl again. She turned to Lewis and asked him not to do all this. After all, when she recovered, she would certainly fulfill her duties. But she did not want all this to happen in such a place and in such an environment. But the man was not going to make concessions to her. He began to caress her body, but the girl did not feel good about it. She felt very disgusted and vile. She mentally addressed the system and asked it to do something. At that moment, the dog that was in the girl's head said that the best way to calm him down was sincerity, because he was emotionally cold. Luna, who had moved into her thoughts, said that she wanted to bang his head against the wall right now, so she didn't understand where she could get the sincerity from. So she wanted the system to come up with some other, more effective way. The dog asked her to wait a little longer, and when it had passed, she said that Lewis was only interested in political gain and that she could try to use that. Hani explained that in 3 days foreign ambassadors would be arriving and he was planning a hunting banquet. On this day, he personally chose the bow and arrows. The system also said that as his fiancée, she would most likely have to attend this banquet as well. Luna understood everything immediately, so she moved back to the room where he was already undressing her. She screamed loudly and said that if she resisted, her wounds would definitely get worse, and she knew that he didn't care about her health. However, if she appeared before foreign ambassadors in a few days like this, it could ruin his reputation and the kingdom. The man, hearing this, immediately looked at her. Then he stopped and asked how she even knew that foreign ambassadors were due to arrive in a few days. He even asked in an alarmed voice if she had planted a spy in his estate. Luna didn't understand why he made such an assumption, so she said that she simply guessed, because he wouldn't have come to buy hunting equipment in person at the market if it weren't so important. Luna also said that she saw the guards holding newly purchased bows and arrows in their hands. So what this at all not espionage, but simply observation. Lewis then moved closer to her and told her to recover, because in 3 days they would see each other at the hunting banquet. The girl immediately said that she would do everything in her power, and then she was able to breathe a sigh of relief. She got herself in order and left the room. After that, she went to get some aromatic oil and was very glad that she finally managed to buy it because it was quite difficult. Honey, who was walking next to her, immediately barked happily and congratulated her owner because she had taken the first step towards completing the task. Luna herself was very happy. She was going to give it to her cousin when she returned. She was, I'm sure that he will very glad. However, when she got home and gave the oil to Andrea, he took a stand and said he would not use it. The girl was then incredibly amazed. She asked why, because it smelled so nice. She also said that if he didn't believe it, he could try it, and then tell him how he liked it. The man pushed her bag away with his hand and said that if she wanted to thank him for saving her, she didn't have to do it. In a voice tired from lack of sleep, he said that he was going to fight for the inheritance anyway. He only saved her because they were family, and he couldn't watch her die. The girl looked at him with a sad look and said that it was not out of gratitude. She just sincerely cared about him and asked why he so stubbornly refused a way to fall asleep and calm down. But Andrea said that in that case he didn't need anything even more. He didn't want any care from his rival, so he turned around, left, and said goodbye to her. Luna was very angry. She didn't understand why he was so stubborn, and she couldn't understand why it was so hard for him to accept a simple gift. But she was also stubborn and understood that he had to use it. So coming closer to him, she hit the wall with her hand so that the man was a little scared because he did not expect it. She said in a rough voice that she had tried to get this oil for him, but he refused, and it was very rude of him. Luna began to threaten him, saying that she would follow him every day and bother him if he did not take it. Andrea was very surprised. Then she handed him the package and said that she would check tomorrow whether he had used it. The man had no choice, so he agreed and took it. After that, she turned around and started to walk away, still feeling angry at him. Andrea stood there and watched her go. He didn't understand why she was so insistent on giving him this gift, and he was surprised that she genuinely cared about him. He was also surprised that she did all this despite his plans to seize the inheritance. At that very moment, his bitterness decreased by a couple of points, and Luna found out about it soon after. The girl returned to her bedroom and, sitting on the bed, sighed heavily. She was already starting to get irritated by all this. These main characters, one more stubborn than the other, and absolutely no one wants to make concessions. At that moment, Hanaya came running to her and said that she had good news. Andrea's level of bitterness had decreased. The dog also said that this was the first time she was able to significantly reduce the protagonist's level of bitterness, and as a reward, she received 1 invisibility card. The girl took the letter and was very surprised. Firstly, because she did not expect the level of bitterness to actually decrease, and also did not think that she could even be given a reward for this. When Luna picked up the letter, she realized that it was quite a useful thing, and she would definitely need to use it wisely. After that, she asked Honey if the task was really considered completed only if the level of bitterness of all 4 main characters was completely reset, because she considered it quite energy-consuming and not very good. But unfortunately, the answer was not positive. She really needed to appease everyone. So the dog advised her to use the resources on those main characters who are the hardest to win over. When the girl heard this proposal, she immediately thought about it and realized that she was really right, because this was a reasonable decision. At that moment, it seemed to her that Andre was most easily won over by an aloe that, although a little crazy, was still amenable to analysis. And that meant that everything wasn't as bad as it could have been. Luna also understood that the most difficult would most likely be Fox, about whom she knew nothing. But besides, his initial level of bitterness was simply off the charts, and therefore she did not even know what to take on there. She held up the letter that Hannah had given her and decided that she would use the invisibility card on Lisa. She knew that when he was alone, he would definitely stop pretending and she would be able to watch him and collect data for the system, staying in the shadows. Hani immediately approved of her decision. At that moment, the maid Amy suddenly ran into the room and told Mrs. Luna that they had a problem. The maid explained that the Count had learned that she had failed the engagement and had returned early from his estate. Therefore, now he expected her already in the office. As soon as the girl heard about this, she immediately went there. She also understood perfectly well that she, with great regret, would not be able to avoid problems. The man was silent for a while. Then he said that he had heard that she had been thrown out during her engagement to His Majesty. So he demanded that she tell him what had happened. Luna turned away from him and said that it was nothing special. He just suddenly told her to get out, so she didn't argue and left. But the man was very angry. He raised his voice and said that it was very stupid because this engagement was very important, and she just went and left without trying to win his favor. As soon as Luna heard this, she didn't understand what he meant. Did he really want her to bite him with her teeth? She also didn't know if it was okay for her father to say that to her. But she didn't just tolerate it all. The girl looked him in the eye and asked why on earth she had to fight for him since she hadn't wanted this engagement in the first place. And that exactly he insisted. The man became even more angry about this and asked since when she had learned to contradict her elders and especially her father. He swung a stick at her and said she was impudent. By hitting her, he was going to show her how to behave with elders. The girl immediately became very scared. She began to cover her face with her hands. However, at that moment, as she was already expecting a blow from the stick, she suddenly saw Andrea running up to her and covering her with his body. The gift turned out to be quite strong. So much so that his uniform even tore behind him and a red cut appeared. Luna worriedly asked if Leon was okay, but the guy told her not to pay attention because she could think that he was thanking her for that gift. Then the man turned directly to the boy and said that he was only the adopted son of his older brother, and he did not understand how he dared to burst into the office and interfere with him raising the future heiress of the family. At that moment, the guy moved away from Luna and, bowing, asked for forgiveness, saying that on that day he took her away from the palace, therefore he was also responsible for what happened and should have been punished in her place. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised. She immediately turned to him in a quiet voice and said that this was not true, and asked him not to do this, because she understood how cruel her father could be. But Andrea was not going to back down from his words. Then the Count, shouting at Luna, asked, "Since when did she start calling her adopted son brother?" And also inquired, "Has she really completely forgotten what he taught her?" Luna at this point lowered her head and said that she understood everything. Thinking that she should follow the original, she said that she should just call him by his name. The Count irritated her incredibly much, and she considered this father of the main character to be simply crazy. Also, she was able to restrain herself and not strangle this man only because he was the head of the family. Otherwise, she would already long time ago. This did. At that moment, the man turned around and, walking to the other side of the room, said that he was glad that she understood everything, and added that she would spend that night on the street with Andrea. The man also said that Luna should understand perfectly well what position she is in, because she is the future heir of the family, and her body is a treasure. Therefore she not maybe lead myself selfishly. Luna stood with her head down, and she herself did not understand how this man could behave even worse than in the novel. After all, he had already irritated her then, but now she was ready to really kill him. After this conversation, the boy and the girl were indeed sent outside. Luna sat at the entrance and was shaking all over. She said that it was incredibly cold, and that it seemed to her that her body was literally covered in ice. Andrea, who was sitting next to her, did not understand why this was so, because despite the fact that it was raining outside, it was not that cold. In his form was quite fine. Then he decided to check her temperature by touching her forehead with his hand, and he realized that she had a very high fever because she was literally burning all over. The guy immediately got to his feet and said that he would immediately call someone to take her back, because this was not right. Luna, looking at him with a pitiful look, asked him not to leave. She grabbed his hand and said that it was already late at night. No one would open the door for them. She tried to calm him down by telling him that despite her slight fever, she was fine, and that she just wanted him to stay close to her because she was afraid of thunder. The guy, of course, didn't like this idea, because he understood that he could get even sicker this way if he didn't provide the necessary help. But he couldn't do anything, because he himself understood that they wouldn't open the door. So he agreed and sat down next to Luna. However, before this, he took off his jacket and threw it over her shoulders, asking her not to take it off, because that way she should be at least a little warmer. The girl smiled slightly and thanked him. After that, her trembling increased, and she said that she was getting colder and colder. It was hard for the man to watch all this, because he couldn't even help in any way. He said that she already had a high fever, and there were at least 4 more hours until dawn. He understood that she would not last all this time without help. The girl then laid her head on his shoulder and told her brother that everything was fine. She just a little, he'll sleep, and that's it. Necessarily will pass. Then she smiled happily and said that he was very warm and soft, so she replied that she would hug him and never let him go. So in a way, exactly will warm up. Of course, Andrea was worried when he saw this. He immediately tried to push the girl away and said that she needed to get up faster. After all, if someone saw this, told her father, then he would get angry again and punish her. But Luna put her arms around him and said she didn't care. He was too nice to her and her father wasn't, so she hated him and loved her little brother. The guy, hearing this, was very surprised and asked, why did she suddenly decide that he treats her well? He also explained that they were actually going to compete for the right of succession, and he asked in surprise, was she really being kind to him just because of one gesture he had made? He looked at her and asked, didn't she want to become an heir? But Wen saw that she fell asleep, then fell silent. He sighed heavily and said that it didn't matter at all whether the person in front of her was a good person or a bad person. She always revealed her true feelings. He wondered why she had suddenly become so open. He also felt a little pleased that she was so sincere towards him, and he even began to doubt whether he should fight for the inheritance. And so many hours passed from that moment. And finally the next morning arrived. When Luna opened her eyes, she found herself in her bedroom and did not understand how she ended up there. She clearly remembered how they were kicked out yesterday. Then she felt sick and lost consciousness. Honey, who was next to her, said that Andrea found a way to bring her back. The dog also explained that he called the doctor to bring down his temperature. Level cruelty decreased on whole 3 item. Luna, who still felt very sleepy and tired, asked in surprise, was it really he who brought her back? After that, she started remembering the events of the previous night and couldn't understand what she had done at all, and also how she could look him in the eyes now. At this point, Honey said that she shouldn't worry so much, because she saw how the girl really enjoyed it last night. But Luna continued to scream in panic. She said that it was all too embarrassing for her and asked the dog to shut up already because she couldn't stand it all. But then suddenly Honey tried to calm her down and told her mistress that now was not the time for this. The invisibility card was about to expire. If she did not use it, the card would simply disappear. The girl, hearing this, was indignant. She could not believe that she was already having a hard time and they were also rushing her. However, the dog replied that there was nothing to be done about it, since she certainly couldn't change it. Luna stood up from her place and asked what they were waiting for. She suggested to go search Fox directly now. Of course, the dog didn't mind. She immediately galloped after the girl. After some time, Moon came to the theater Nightingales. The girl really did become invisible and made her way backstage. There, the actors were talking about the boss going on break, and they could rest from rehearsals for the 4th act of The Hypocritical King. When she heard this, she immediately headed towards the street, because the guy was their boss. This meant that he was taking a break, and Luna was going to find him as soon as possible. Honey followed her and warned the girl that she needed to be careful, because in the state of invisibility, they could not be heard. But if she dropped something, the card would not be able to hide the sound. Luna replied that she understood everything and decided to be even more careful. When she entered the other room, she thought that he must be there, because the door was locked and she could quietly enter. However, as soon as the girl looked straight ahead, she saw Fox, completely naked, sitting in a hot bath and pouring water over himself. She immediately panicked, because she didn't think he would wash himself. The girl immediately closed her eyes and understood that it was not good to peek, and she had to leave. But Honey replied that she shouldn't go, because if she did, she wouldn't know anything. And in such a situation, case map just in vain is spent. Luna thought about it and said that was true too, but she felt too awkward. She decided to grit her teeth and continue watching. In her mind, she apologized to the fox and tried to convince herself that she was not a pervert, but simply trying to survive. She sighed heavily and thought that no one knew about this, so she shouldn't worry so much about it. At this point, the man leaned against the back of the bathtub and said, "Beverly, I have already successfully entered the royal castle, and if you were next to me, it would be just wonderful." Luna immediately became worried. She stood nearby and did not understand who Beverly was. She, of course, saw this name somewhere in the novel, but did not remember who it was. Honey sighed and said that she couldn't find any information about Beverly either. However, it was obvious that he was missing someone very important. At that moment, the guy, taking a deep breath, plunged straight under the water, and Luna, when she saw this, was very surprised. She immediately asked the dog what he was doing. Could it be? Is training detain breathing? But the system itself was shocked, because it believed that this could not be. He was one of the main characters, and for him to do such stupidity was quite strange. And so some time passed from that moment. However, he still did not emerge. Luna immediately became worried and thought that he missed this Beverly so much that he decided to drown himself and commit suicide because of this. She asked the system if vampires could drown at all, but Honey replied that she didn't know. But if he will die, then exercise will be considered failed. The girl understood that she could not allow this to happen under any circumstances, so she ran to the bathroom and decided that she would save him. Honey tried to stop her and said that if she had physical contact with someone while in the invisibility effect, they would simply disappear. But Luna was no longer listening to her. She had already dipped her hands under the water and pulled the fox out of the water. As soon as the guy saw her, he was very surprised. He asked how she ended up in this place and what she was doing. Luna immediately let him go and said that she came to watch his performance, but did not find him. She also said that in that case, she decided to go to him personally, accidentally saw him dive into the water with his head, and it seemed to her that he wanted to commit suicide, so she decided to save him. The guy was very surprised to hear this, because he actually decided to sit quietly under the water, and she decided that he wanted to commit suicide. This made the girl feel even more awkward. She apologized and said that she really didn't know that he meant something completely different. But at that moment, the fox grabbed her hand. He was so strong that he was able to easily drag the girl straight into the water, even though she was wearing a dress. Luna screamed loudly and, coughing because water had gotten into her mouth, asked what he was doing. But the fox, moving closer to her, looked her straight in the eyes and said that she was lying, because there were many theater pipes rehearsing outside. If she had come to see the opera, they would have met her first and then told him. In other words, the girl certainly couldn't have ended up there. That's why he would hear explanation. Luna was actually very worried because she didn't expect this guy to be so smart. She needed to come up with another excuse and a more plausible one. She quickly lowered her head and said that she would tell the truth. She also added that she had come to this place secretly because she had fallen in love with him at first sight and wanted to confess to him in person. However, when she saw him underwater, it scared her very much, and she decided to save him because she didn't want him to die. The guy looked at her with distrust and asked, there was a hint of mockery in his voice, asked, really, he liked her. Luna was worried, wondering if he really didn't believe her. But in fact, she was very ashamed because she didn't think that even this way she wouldn't be able to convince him. But then suddenly the fox, smiling, said that he believed. Besides, she really liked Miss Luna and asked, why don't we take advantage of this opportunity and get to know each other better? The girl was very surprised to hear this. She could not believe that he had fallen in love with her so quickly and assumed that he was most likely just testing her words. She also understood that if she refused to have close contact with him, it would end badly, and with a trembling voice she asked how exactly he wanted to get to know him. She would be happy to. At that moment, he put his hand on her cheek and said that first of all, they needed to be honest and open with each other. The girl tried to calm down, because she knew that in the original, he was one of those who would not touch a woman he did not like. So what she was? I'm sure that nothing not will happen. But at that moment, he suddenly said that after that, they should touch lips and merge in a kiss. The girl couldn't stand it any longer. She wanted to end this horror as soon as possible, and pushing him away, she asked why they were making things so complicated. Her face was red and her voice was shaking. She said she liked the straightforwardness and wondered why they didn't just do it right there and then. The fox smiled happily and said nothing. In fact, he had not expected her to be so proactive. He also thought that she had not lied, and his charm had worked, which meant that she might have fallen in love with him. He suddenly turned away from her and, asking for forgiveness, said that it was a joke. As much as he didn't want to, he wouldn't be so harsh with her. Luna sighed heavily and said that she had already thought that they would be able to get closer to him that day, and replied that she was very disappointed now. In fact, it wasn't like that. She breathed a sigh of relief and realized that, as expected, it was just a test, and that he didn't have to do anything to her. Then she also got out of the bathroom and said that she would go now so that her father would not notice her disappearance, and suggested that they agree on another time. The guy didn't mind and said that next time he would organize a great date for her, so that she wouldn't be disappointed anymore. After Luna went out into the yard, she turned to the system and asked if it had been able to analyze anything since the girl had to take such risks. Honey replied that this was exactly it. His tendency to overexert himself in emotions was linked to bipolar disorder. In other words, his condition was unstable, and he was just one step away from depression. Such sharp emotional swings in a short period of time exhausted his body and mind, which makes him even prone to suicide. As soon as Luna heard this, she was very surprised, because she didn't expect that this person could actually have suicidal tendencies. The dog then said that besides all this, they learned something about this mysterious Beverly, namely that she was the fox's late sister. The girl was very surprised to hear this. She thought about it for a while, but then she remembered how it was told in the story. She said that in the original it was mentioned that many years ago, Beverly fell in love with the human king and even had a child with him. And that king seduced her specifically in order to find the vampire's lair through the girl and destroy them all. Unfortunately for him, this succeeded due. After that, Fox changed his appearance and sneaked into the capital to avenge his dear Beverly. The descendants of the royal family of demon hunters, that is, the families of Louis and Luna, became his greatest enemies. Therefore, even when the fox fell in love with the moon, he tormented both her and himself. Here, the bitterness of such a protagonist is more difficult for the girl than even reaching the stars, although this is almost impossible. Then suddenly she heard someone's voice behind her who turned to her in surprise. He not expected Girl C. When she turned her head to the side, she saw Andrea in front of her. He looked at her worriedly and asked when she managed to escape from the house and why she was all wet.